November 25th, 1943, 1:56 a.m., off Cape St. George, Solomon Islands. 5 American destroyers race through pitch-black water at 31 knots. Captain Arleigh Burke stands on the bridge of USS Charles Osborne, radar showing 5 Japanese destroyers just 5,800 yards ahead. His squadron has been chasing them for 90 minutes. The Japanese are running. Burke orders his ships to turn right, directly toward the enemy. At this range, torpedoes can't miss. Neither can theirs. In 60 seconds, both sides will fire. But Burke does something the Japanese don't expect. He holds fire. He waits. 10 more seconds. 5 more seconds. At 4,500 yards, he gives the order. 15 torpedoes leap into the darkness. The Japanese fire back, but Burke's already turning. Their torpedoes miss by 50 yards, exploding in his wake. His don't miss. The destroyer Onami erupts in flames. Then Makinami. 2 enemy ships destroyed in 4 minutes. The remaining Japanese scatter and run. By dawn, 3 Japanese destroyers will be at the bottom of the Pacific. Burke's squadron suffers 0 casualties, 0 damage. Admiral Halsey will call it an almost perfect surface action. The statistics say this shouldn't have happened. In night surface battles against Japanese destroyers, American forces lose 60% of engagements. The Japanese have better torpedoes, better night optics, better tactics. They've been winning these fights for 2 years. Burke's 5 ships face 5 enemy destroyers carrying 900 sailors, trained specifically for night combat. The ocean is 8,000 feet deep here. No air support, no backup. If Burke loses, his entire squadron dies in darkness. And nobody will know what happened until sunrise reveals the wreckage. But Burke is about to do 3 impossible things in the next 90 minutes. First, he'll chase a faster enemy force and catch them without losing his slowest ship. Second, he'll maneuver his squadron through a night engagement without a single friendly fire incident or collision, something most destroyer commanders can't do in daylight. Third, he'll sink 3 enemy destroyers and damage 2 others without taking a single hit. The reason he can do this is simple. For 22 years, every time the Navy told him to do something one way, Burke found a better way and proved it worked. Arleigh Albert Burke. Born October 19, 1901 in Boulder, Colorado. His grandfather was a Swedish immigrant named Anders Petter Björkgren, who changed his name to Burke when he came to America. Young Arleigh grew up on a farm 3 miles outside Boulder, and he learned early that if machinery broke down, you didn't wait for someone else to fix it, you figured it out yourself. He was the kid who took apart the tractor engine to see how it worked, then put it back together better than before. That instinct, that compulsion to understand how things actually function, not just how they're supposed to function, would define everything he did. When he graduated from the Naval Academy in 1923, he ranked 71st out of 413 midshipmen. Not brilliant, not a prodigy, just determined. On graduation day, he married Roberta Gorsuch of Washington, D.C., and told her he planned to make the Navy his career. Well, she said that was fine, but he'd better be good at it. He intended to be. By 1927, Burke had decided surface gunnery wasn't complicated enough. Most young officers pick a specialty and coast. Burke picked ordnance engineering, explosives, propellants, gun mechanisms, the most technically demanding field in the service. The Navy sent him to the University of Michigan for a master's degree in chemical engineering. He graduated in 1929 as one of only 46 officers in the entire Navy, qualified as a specialist in ordnance design and production. He wasn't interested in theory. He wanted to know why guns jammed, why shells misfired, why fire control systems failed under combat stress. He spent 3 years in the Bureau of Ordnance in Washington, redesigning weapons systems that didn't work. The officers twice his age would bring him problems they'd been wrestling with for months. Burke would take the blueprints home, study them overnight, and return the next morning with solutions that made everyone wonder why they hadn't thought of it themselves. He had a gift for seeing the one thing everyone else missed. In 1939, Burke took command of the destroyer USS Craven. She was a tired old flushdecker from World War I, obsolete and slow. The crew expected an easy assignment. Burke had other plans. Within 6 months, Craven won the fleet gunnery competition, beating modern destroyers with twice her firepower. How? Burke trained his gun crews to reload faster. He redesigned the ammunition handling procedures. He timed every movement, eliminated wasted motion, drilled his men until they could fire, reload, and fire again in 40% less time than regulations specified. When inspectors arrived to see how he'd done it, Burke handed them stopwatches and said they could time it themselves. They did. Craven's crew broke their own records during the inspection. Burke received a commendation. His crew received grudging respect from every other ship in the fleet. When war came in 1941, Burke was stuck in Washington. He wanted command. The Navy wanted his brain in the Bureau of Ordnance, fixing the weapons that were failing in combat. For 18 months, Burke worked 16-hour days redesigning gun mounts, improving ammunition, and solving problems that were killing sailors in the Pacific. He hated it. He wrote repeated requests for sea duty. The Bureau kept denying them. By mid-1942, Burke was a commander with a reputation as the best ordnance engineer in the Navy and zero combat experience. He was 40 years old. If he didn't get to sea soon, the war would pass him without ever hearing a shot fired in anger. In June 1942, his transfer finally came through. He was ordered to the South Pacific as a staff officer, not command, staff. Burke was furious, but he went. In February 1943, Burke got his first real test. He was made commander of Destroyer Division 43, 4 destroyers operating in the Solomon Islands. This wasn't the glamorous assignment it sounded like. The Solomons campaign was brutal. Japanese forces controlled the air and sea at night. American ships ventured north after dark and often didn't return. Burke's first mission was to escort supply ships to Guadalcanal, then patrol for enemy submarines. A standard procedure: sail in formation, follow the book, stay alert. Burke looked at the patrol patterns and realized they were predictable. Any competent submarine commander could set up an ambush, so Burke changed the pattern. He varied speed, varied course, varied timing. His destroyers zigzagged unpredictably, forcing enemy submarines to guess. In 3 months of operations, his division encountered 7 enemy submarines. He sank 2, lost 0 ships, the Navy noticed. On November 1st, 1943, Burke participated in the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay. His Division 45 was part of Rear Admiral Aaron Merrill's Task Force 39, supporting the Marine landing at Bougainville. Japanese Admiral Sentaro Omori led a powerful force, 4 cruisers and 6 destroyers, to attack the American transports. Merrill had 4 cruisers and 8 destroyers. At 2:27 a.m., radar contact. Range, 10 miles. Merrill ordered his cruisers to open fire. Burke's destroyers screened the flanks. The battle turned chaotic fast. Japanese ships maneuvered wildly, laying smoke, firing torpedoes in every direction. American ships risked hitting each other in the darkness. Burke kept his destroyers in tight formation, maneuvering as a unit, not scattering. When a Japanese cruiser broke through the American line, Burke's division turned in pursuit, closing to 6,000 yards and opening fire. The cruiser took multiple hits and withdrew, trailing smoke. Burke's ships suffered minor damage but remained operational. The Japanese lost 1 cruiser and 1 destroyer sunk. More importantly, they withdrew before reaching the transports. The Marines landed unopposed. The Burke earned the Navy Cross. He also earned something more valuable: Admiral Halsey's attention. October 23, 1943, Halsey promoted Burke to command Destroyer Squadron 23, the Little Beavers. This was a squadron with a reputation. They'd been in continuous combat for 6 months, fought in 8 major engagements, and lost ships. Morale was shaky. Burke arrived and immediately changed everything. He didn't give speeches. He rewrote the tactical manual. Standard Navy doctrine said destroyers should stay in line, follow the flagship, maintain formation discipline. Burke threw it out. He trained his squadron to operate as 5 independent hunters working together. Each captain had authority to maneuver independently as long as they stayed coordinated. Burke drilled them relentlessly on one principle: when you have radar contact, close fast, fire first, keep moving, don't wait for orders, don't hesitate. Speed and aggression win night battles. The other destroyer squadrons thought Burke was reckless. His own captains weren't sure either, but they practiced. Every day, Burke ran tactical drills, formation changes, emergency turns, split-second communications. By mid-November, his captains could execute complex maneuvers in total darkness without radio communication, using only signal lights and training. Burke told them they were ready. On November 24th, they would prove it. November 24th, 1943. Afternoon, Purvis Bay, Solomon Islands. Burke receives word that USS Spence has a boiler casualty. A tube is clogged. The repair will take hours. Without full power, Spence can only make 30 knots. Burke's other destroyers can make 33 to 34 knots. This is a problem. Intelligence reports indicate a Japanese convoy is heading south tonight. 5 destroyers evacuating troops from Buka. Halsey wants them intercepted. If Burke waits for Spence to complete repairs, he'll miss the intercept window. If he leaves Spence behind, he loses 20% of his firepower. Standard procedure: report the delay, wait for repairs, sail at full strength tomorrow. Burke doesn't do standard procedure. He calculates. The Japanese destroyers will be moving fast, but they're loaded with troops and supplies, maybe 32 knots maximum. If Burke pushes his squadron to 31 knots, he can catch them with all 5 ships. It's risky. 31 knots for 6 straight hours will strain every boiler in the squadron. But Burke decides 5 ships at 31 knots beats 4 ships at 34 knots. At 3 p.m., Spence's repair is complete enough. Burke signals Halsey, proceeding at 31 knots. Halsey's staff thinks it's a joke. They reply sarcastically, "Good luck, 31-knot Burke. The nickname will stick forever." 6 p.m., Burke's squadron steams north. 5 destroyers in column: Charles Osborne, flagship, Claxton, Dyson, Converse, and Spence. The ocean is flat calm. No moon. Visibility near zero. Burke's radar operators scan continuously. Nothing yet. The Japanese convoy is supposed to pass Cape St. George around midnight. Burke's intercept course puts him 60 miles southwest of their expected route. If intelligence is wrong, if the Japanese change course, if they're delayed, Burke will miss them entirely. He'll burn thousands of gallons of fuel, exhaust his crews, and accomplish nothing. Burke doesn't care. He's betting everything on being in the right place at the right time. At 31 knots, his squadron cuts through the darkness, boilers roaring, every man at battle stations. 11:45 p.m. radar contact. Range, 22,000 yards, 11 miles. 5 ships bearing north. Speed, 30 knots. It's them. Burke doesn't announce it. He just increases speed to 32 knots, straining Spence's damaged boiler. His plan is simple: close to torpedo range, fire everything, and get out before the Japanese can react. But there's a complication. The Japanese are zigzagging, changing course every few minutes to avoid submarines. Burke has to predict their movements, position his squadron for a clean shot. If he guesses wrong, the Japanese will detect him first and launch their own torpedoes. Burke studies the radar plot. See, the enemy is zigzagging but following a predictable pattern, 3 minutes on each leg. He calculates their next turn, orders his squadron to adjust course. For the next 90 minutes, Burke plays a lethal game of geometry, matching every Japanese course change, closing the range without being detected. His captains follow his maneuvers perfectly. By 1:30 a.m., Burke's squadron is 8,000 yards behind the Japanese, undetected, matching their course exactly. 1:45 a.m. The Japanese convoy splits. 2 destroyers peel off and head west, probably a screening force. 3 destroyers continue north, loaded with troops. Burke has to choose: pursue all 5 or focus on the 3 troop carriers. He chooses the 3. Those are the primary targets. The other 2 can be hunted later. Point. Burke signals his squadron. Converse and Spence will break off and engage the 2 screening destroyers. Burke will take Osborne, Claxton, and Dyson after the main group. It's a bold move, splitting his force in a night engagement. Most commanders wouldn't risk it. Burke trusts his captains. At 1:50 a.m., his squadron splits. Converse and Spence turn west. Burke turns north, accelerating to 33 knots. Range to the Japanese, 7,000 yards, still undetected. The enemy is steaming straight away, oblivious. 1:56 a.m., Burke's 3 destroyers turn directly toward the enemy. Range, 5,800 yards. This is the moment. If Burke fires too early, his torpedoes might miss. If he waits too long, the Japanese will spot him and fire first. Burke holds his course, closing the range. Every second, his destroyers cut 50 yards off the distance. 5,000 yards, 4,800. His radar operators watch the range tick down. Burke's executive officer whispers, "Captain, they're going to see us." Burke says nothing. 4,600 yards, 4,500. At 4,500 yards, Burke gives the order: fire torpedoes, all tubes. 15. Mark 15 torpedoes launch from Burke's 3 destroyers, running at 45 knots toward the Japanese. The launch illuminates the night for 3 seconds, long enough. The Japanese see it. They immediately turn hard and fire their own torpedoes, 18 of them. Burke orders an emergency turn to starboard. His 3 destroyers wheel right in perfect unison, presenting their sterns to the incoming torpedoes. The Japanese torpedoes race past, missing by 50 yards, exploding in the American wakes. 30 seconds pass. 45 seconds. Then the night erupts. Burke's torpedoes hit. The destroyer Onami takes 3 torpedoes amidships. She explodes so violently that her bow and stern both point skyward before she sinks. 11 seconds later, Makanami takes 2 hits. She breaks in half. Both sections sink within 90 seconds. The 3rd Japanese destroyer, Yugiri, takes 1 hit in the stern, her rudder jammed, engines failing. She's crippled but still afloat. Burke's destroyers close in, switching to guns. At 3,000 yards, they open fire with 5-inch guns. Yugiri fires back, but she's dead in the water, burning. Burke's gunfire is devastatingly accurate. His ordnance training pays off. His gun crews reload faster, fire faster, hit harder. Within 6 minutes, Yugiri is a flaming wreck. She sinks at 2:28 a.m. Point. 3 Japanese destroyers destroyed in 32 minutes. Burke's ships are untouched. But he's not done. 10 miles to the west, Converse and Spence have found the 2 screening destroyers. They attack at 2:20 a.m., firing 8 torpedoes. The Japanese destroyers turn to evade, and all 8 torpedoes miss. Now it's a gun battle. Converse and Spence close to 5,000 yards and open fire. The Japanese return fire, and this fight is vicious. Shells land within 100 yards of Converse. Spence's forward gun turret jams. For 20 minutes, the four ships pound each other at point-blank range. Then Burke arrives. Osborne, Claxton, and Dyson race in from the east at 35 knots, adding their firepower. Now it's 5 American destroyers against 2 Japanese. The outcome is inevitable. One Japanese destroyer, Amagiri, manages to escape into a squall point, trailing smoke. The other, Uzuki, is hit repeatedly and crippled. She limps away, barely afloat. Burke considers pursuing, but dawn is 2 hours away. He's deep in Japanese-controlled waters. 4 enemy airfields are within 60 miles. If he's still here at sunrise, Japanese bombers will destroy his squadron. Burke orders withdrawal. At 3:15 a.m., his 5 destroyers turn south at 30 knots. 3:45 a.m., Burke signals Halsey. Engaged enemy force. 3 destroyers sunk, 2 damaged. No friendly casualties. Returning to base. Halsey's response is immediate. Well done, 31 knot. Thanksgiving services will be held upon your return. Burke reads the message and smiles. It's November 25th, Thanksgiving morning. At 6 a.m., Burke's squadron enters friendly waters. The sun rises behind them. The Japanese reconnaissance planes search the area where the battle occurred, but find nothing. Burke's ships are already 50 miles south, steaming toward Purvis Bay. The radar operators stand down. The gun crews secure their weapons. For the first time in 8 hours, Burke leaves the bridge and goes below for coffee. His hands are steady. He's been awake for 26 straight hours. He'll write his after-action report later. Right now, he just wants coffee. November 25th, 1943. 2 p.m. Purvis Bay. Burke's squadron arrives to a hero's welcome. Every ship in the harbor sounds its horn. Sailors line the rails, cheering. Burke orders his destroyers to nest together at anchor. At 4 p.m., chaplains from 3 faiths, Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish, hold Thanksgiving services on the decks. Burke attends all 3. Now, Admiral Halsey's message arrives during the Protestant service. The Battle of Cape St. George was an almost perfect surface action. Commander Destroyer Squadron 23 is hereby commended for exceptional skill and courage. The phrase, almost perfect, will appear in official Navy records. Historians will debate what Halsey thought was imperfect. Burke never asked, he knew. His squadron had let 1 Japanese destroyer escape. That wasn't perfect. The Japanese reaction was immediate and revealing. Within 48 hours, Japanese Naval Command issued new orders. All destroyer convoys in the Solomons must operate with air cover. Night runs without air support are prohibited. The reason is explicit in the orders. American destroyer forces under Captain Burke have demonstrated superior night-fighting capability. The Japanese destroyers are no longer to engage American destroyers in surface combat unless they have overwhelming numerical superiority. Think about that. For 2 years, the Japanese dominated night surface combat in the Pacific. Now they're ordering their ships to avoid battle. Burke's squadron didn't just win a fight. They broke Japanese confidence, but Burke wasn't finished. February 22, 1944, St. George Channel. Burke's squadron intercepts another Japanese convoy, this time a naval tug and 3 escort vessels, attempting to evacuate troops from New Ireland. Burke attacks at dawn, sinking the tug and damaging 2 escorts. But something goes wrong. As his destroyers maneuver at high speed, they stumble into a Japanese minefield. Burke doesn't realize it until mines start exploding around his ships. He's in the middle of a minefield. Enemy shore batteries are firing at him, and Japanese aircraft are inbound. Standard procedure, retreat immediately. Hope you don't hit a mine. Burke does the opposite. He orders his ships to increase speed to 31 knots and charge straight through the minefield. The logic is insane but mathematically sound. At 31 knots, his ships are moving so fast that even if they trigger a mine, they'll be past it before it detonates. Mines are designed to catch slow-moving ships. Burke's destroyers blast through the minefield at full speed, mines exploding in their wakes but not under their hulls. Admiral Halsey, monitoring the radio, sends a sarcastic message. "What are you doing in a Japanese minefield?" Burke's reply is one word: 31 knots. All 5 destroyers escape without damage. This story spreads through the Pacific Fleet within days. Burke's nickname goes from joke to legend. In November 1943 through February 1944, the Little Beavers fought in 22 separate engagements. They destroyed 1 Japanese cruiser, 9 destroyers, 1 submarine, several smaller ships, and approximately 30 aircraft. They never lost a ship. They suffered minimal casualties. No other destroyer squadron in World War II matched that record. The Little Beavers received the Presidential Unit Citation, the only destroyer squadron to earn that honor. Burke received the Navy Cross, the Distinguished Service Medal, and promotion to Commodore. But the real achievement wasn't the medals. It was what Burke had proved. Aggressive, coordinated destroyer tactics could dominate night surface combat. Every destroyer squadron in the Pacific began adopting Burke's methods. By mid-1944, American destroyers weren't just holding their own against the Japanese, they were hunting them. In March 1944, Burke left the Little Beavers. He was promoted and assigned as Chief of Staff to Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Fast Carrier Task Force 58, the most powerful naval striking force in history. This was a stunning assignment. Burke was a destroyer man, a surface warfare officer. Mitcher commanded carriers, the Navy's elite. Why pick Burke? Because Mitcher wanted someone who understood surface combat, someone who could coordinate the battleships, cruisers, and destroyers that screened the carriers. Burke had never worked with carriers. He studied carrier operations for 3 weeks, then reported to Mitcher's flagship. The Mitcher looked at him and said, "Can you do this job?" Burke said, "I can learn." Mitcher said, "Good, you start tomorrow." For the next 15 months, Burke served as Mitcher's chief of staff through the campaigns for Palau, Leyte, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. He planned fleet movements, coordinated airstrikes, and positioned surface forces. On May 11, 1945, a kamikaze hit Mitcher's flagship, USS Bunker Hill. The impact killed 390 men. Burke and Mitcher were on the bridge. The blast knocked them down but didn't kill them. Burke got up, checked Mitcher, then began organizing damage control. They transferred to another carrier and continued operations. Burke never mentioned it in his reports. The war ended in August 1945. Burke was 43 years old. He had commanded destroyers for 18 months and served as chief of staff to one of the Navy's greatest admirals. He'd earned 2 Navy Crosses, a Distinguished Service Medal, and a reputation as one of the most aggressive combat commanders in the Pacific. He could have retired, written memoirs, taken a desk job. He did none of those things. He went back to work. He served in the Navy for 20 more years. In 1955, President Eisenhower appointed him Chief of Naval Operations, the highest position in the Navy. Burke was a 2-star admiral at the time, 92nd in seniority. Eisenhower jumped him over 92 senior admirals because he wanted someone who wasn't afraid to fight bureaucracy, the way Burke fought the Japanese. Burke served 3 terms as CNO, 6 years total, longer than anyone before or since. During his tenure, he championed the Polaris submarine-launched ballistic missile program, supported Admiral Hyman Rickover's nuclear submarine program, and modernized the entire surface fleet. He worked 15-hour days, 6 days a week, for 6 years. He never stopped being the man who stayed on the bridge for 26 straight hours, because his sailors needed him there. Arleigh Burke died on January 1st, 1996, in Bethesda, Maryland. He was 94 years old. President Bill Clinton attended his funeral. Burke was buried at the United States Naval Academy Cemetery in Annapolis, Maryland, where he'd graduated 73 years earlier. His grave is simple: Admiral Arleigh A. Burke, October 19, 1901, January 1st, 1996. His wife, Roberta, was buried beside him in July 1997. There's no grand monument, no towering memorial, just a headstone in a quiet cemetery. But Burke's legacy isn't in the ground, it's on the water. The Navy's most advanced class of destroyers, 68 ships and counting, bears his name, the Arleigh Burke class. Every one of those ships carries his nickname inscribed somewhere on the hull, 31 Knot Burke. When sailors serve on an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, they learn the story of the man who earned that name. Some stories don't fit on headstones. There are two ways to tell Burke's story. The first way is the legend: a cowboy destroyer captain who ignored orders, broke every rule, charged through minefields at full speed, and never lost a ship because he was lucky and fearless. The second way is the documented record: an ordnance engineer who studied weapons systems for 15 years, redesigned destroyer tactics based on mathematical analysis of radar and torpedo performance, trained his crews until complex maneuvers became muscle memory, and won 22 consecutive engagements because he eliminated variables and controlled chaos through preparation. Both are true. Both are remarkable. But here's what matters: Burke never made a decision based on what was safe. Every commander in the Navy faced the same question in every battle: do I follow doctrine or do I improvise? Doctrine is safe. Doctrine protects you. If you follow the manual and lose, nobody blames you. Burke never cared about that. When Spence's boiler broke down, doctrine said, wait for repairs. Burke calculated that 31 knots was fast enough and sailed immediately. When his squadron was split during the battle, doctrine said, regroup before attacking. See, Burke attacked with 3 ships because waiting meant the Japanese would escape. When he found himself in a minefield, doctrine said, retreat slowly. Burke accelerated because physics said a mine couldn't catch a ship moving at 31 knots. Every time he chose the tactically sound option that terrified everyone else. And every time, it worked. Not because he was lucky, because he'd done the math. There's a second pattern in Burke's career that's easy to miss. He spent 22 years preparing for 18 months of combat command. Most officers would resent that ratio. Burke never did. He spent 7 years studying ordnance not because he enjoyed it, but because he knew weapons systems would matter in the war he knew was coming. He spent 3 years in the Bureau of Ordnance during the war, fixing other people's problems, because he understood that ships needed working guns more than they needed another commander. When he finally got his Destroyer Squadron, he was the most prepared commander in the Pacific. He knew exactly how every weapon worked, exactly how every system failed, exactly how every tactic could be countered. His 18 months in combat weren't luck. They were the payoff on 22 years of preparation. Burke understood something most people miss. When the impossible moment arrives, you don't rise to the occasion. You default to your training. If your training is perfect, the impossible becomes routine. The story is this: speed isn't about how fast you're moving, it's about how fast you're thinking. Burke earned his nickname because of a broken boiler and a sarcastic radio message. But he kept that nickname because every decision he made was faster and better than his opponent's decisions. The Japanese destroyers at Cape St. George were steaming at 30 knots. Burke's ships were steaming at 31 knots. 1 knot difference. But Burke's thinking was 10 knots faster. He predicted their course changes. He positioned his ships before the Japanese knew he was there. He fired first and maneuvered before their counterattack arrived. By the time the Japanese realized they were in a fight, Burke had already won it. That's what 31 knots meant, not speed, tempo. The speed of thought, the speed of decision, the speed of execution. Burke lived at 31 knots his entire life, and nobody could keep up. Burke spent his final years in a modest home in Fairfax, Virginia. He never wrote memoirs. He never sought publicity. When reporters asked him about his war record, he'd redirect the conversation to his sailors. When historians called him a hero, he'd correct them. The little Beavers were heroes. I just drove the boat. In 1991, the Navy commissioned USS Arleigh Burke, the lead ship of the class that bears his name. Burke was 90 years old, frail, using a wheelchair. At the commissioning ceremony, a young ensign approached him and asked, "Admiral, what should I remember about command?" Burke looked at him and said, "When you have contact with the enemy, close fast and hit hard. Don't give them time to think. If you're moving at 31 knots, they can't catch you." The ensign wrote it down. Burke smiled. Some things you never stop being.